This is what Veth-Sarai Thandrix had come to understand in the final centuries of his life. The ancient council archivist had witnessed the rise of 17 civilizations and the quiet extinction of 9 others. He had catalogued the fall of empires that once stretched across 1,000 suns. He had recorded the names of species that had forgotten themselves, species that had burned too brightly and collapsed into ash, species that had simply grown tired and chosen silence. And through it all, the stars remained unchanged. They burned as they always had, indifferent, eternal, beautiful in their apathy. The Velkhori had risen among them 400,000 years before Veth-Sarai's birth. They had spread across the Orion Arm like a slow tide, patient and deliberate, building their civilization one world at a time. They had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel when humanity's ancestors were still learning to chip stones into primitive tools. They had mapped the quantum foundations of reality, while Earth's dominant species was the trilobite. Veth-Sarai had been taught, as all Velkhori children were taught, that the universe belonged to the patient, that wisdom came from age, that the cosmos favored those who endured. He no longer believed any of it. The observation deck of the Eternal Witness offered a panoramic view of what had once been the Velkhori core worlds. Veth-Sarai stood alone before the curved viewport, his 4 hands clasped behind his back in the posture of formal mourning. His silver-blue skin, weathered by 600 years of service, seemed to absorb the distant light of dying suns. His eyes, 6 of them, arranged in a crescent across his elongated face, tracked the debris field that stretched across 3 light hours of space. Kethvora Prime was gone. The homeworld of his species, the seat of the High Council, the repository of 400 millennia of accumulated knowledge and culture, reduced to expanding cloud of molten rock and frozen atmosphere. 3 billion Velkhori had lived there, scholars, artists, children who had never known war. They were gone now, transformed into particulate matter drifting through the void. The harvesters had come without warning, without negotiation, without mercy. Veth-Sarai pressed one hand against the cold transparency of the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, old, tired, diminished by grief. He could feel the weight of his ceremonial robes, heavy with the medals and honors of a lifetime spent in service to a civilization that might no longer exist by month's end. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Archivist Thandrix. The voice belonged to Fleet Commander Sivalari, younger than Veth-Sarai by 4 centuries, but now bearing the hollow expression of someone who had aged a lifetime in weeks. The Council remnant has reached a decision. Veth-Sarai did not turn. Which decision would that be? The one where we accept extinction gracefully, or the one where we delay it by a few more rotations? Neither. Sevalori stepped forward until she stood beside him, her own reflection joining his in the viewport. Her military uniform was torn at the shoulder, hastily repaired with emergency sealant. A burn scar traced across the left side of her face, fresh, still healing. We are implementing the desperation protocol. The words struck Veth-Sarai like a physical blow. The desperation protocol, he repeated slowly, as if tasting poison. We swore that would never be invoked. We swore. We swore many things before the harvesters came. Sevalori's voice cracked slightly, and she paused to compose herself. Before we lost the 7th Fleet, before Kethvora, before the outer colonies went silent one by one. She turned to face him directly.
We have 11 ships remaining, Archivist. 11 ships from a fleet that once numbered in the tens of thousands. We have perhaps 50 million survivors scattered across refugee vessels and deep space stations.
And the harvesters are not stopping. They are not negotiating. They are not even speaking to us. They simply consume. Vesserai closed his eyes. And you believe the desperation protocol offers salvation?
I believe it offers a chance, nothing more. Reaching out to the younger species, the ones we dismissed, the ones we warned, the ones we... He trailed off, shame coloring his voice.
The ones we abandoned when they asked for help, Sevalori finished. Yes, those species.
The weight of history pressed down upon Velkasrai's shoulders. The Velkori had positioned themselves as guardians of galactic order for eons. They had refused membership in their coalition to dozens of species deemed too aggressive, too unpredictable, too primitive. They had maintained strict quarantine zones around developing worlds. They had watched younger civilizations struggle and fail, intervening only when it served Velkori interests.
And now, in their hour of annihilation, they would go begging to the very species they had rejected.
Which species have responded? Vesserai asked quietly.
Sevalori's expression grew complicated, a mixture of surprise and something that might have been embarrassment. Only one species answered our distress call within the first cycle.
The Thrix? No, they're dealing with their own harvester incursion in the Perseus arm. They sent sympathies, but no ships.
The Korvathi?
Refused. They remember when we denied them advanced terraforming technology. They said, and I quote, "Your problems are not our concern."
The Thorai nodded slowly. The Korvathi had long memories, longer than anyone had given them credit for.
Then who? Sevalori was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an emotion Vesserai could not immediately identify. It took him several seconds to recognize it as profound uncertainty. "The Terrans," she said. "The humans," responded. Vesserai felt his hearts, both of them, skip a beat. "That is not possible," he said. "We classified their system as a permanent quarantine zone 8,000 years ago. We specifically prohibited contact. We destroyed their early exploration vessels before they could leave their home system. He stopped himself, the memories rising unbidden. He remembered the debates in the High Council, the arguments about the strange, violent, beautiful, terrifying species that had evolved on the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. He remembered the projections, the models, the simulations that had tried to predict what humanity would become if allowed to spread among the stars. The results had frightened even the most confident council members. "They found a way out," Sevalori said. "We're not certain how. Our monitoring probes in their system went dark approximately 200 years ago. We assumed malfunction or solar interference. We were wrong." "They escaped," Vesserai breathed. "They bypassed our containment." "They did more than escape, Archivist." Sevalori reached into her uniform and withdrew a small holographic projector. She activated it, and a three-dimensional map of the local arm of the galaxy shimmered into existence between them. Points of light marked known civilizations, territories, disputed zones, and spreading through the map like an unexpected shadow was a region marked with unfamiliar symbols. "Human-occupied space," Sevalori said. "Conservative estimates suggest they control or maintain presence in approximately 800 star systems." Vesserai stared at the map. His scientific mind tried to process the implications, tried to calculate the growth rate required for such expansion in merely 2 centuries. The numbers did not make sense. The logistics defied conventional understanding.
How? Was all he could manage. We don't know. We don't understand them, Archivist. We never did. That's why we locked them away. That's why we tried to keep them contained. Sevalori's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And now they're the only ones coming to help us.
The human vessel arrived at the agreed coordinates 3 cycles later. Vethsorai had been selected for the diplomatic contact, partly because of his age and experience, partly because he had spent decades studying the forbidden archives on Earth and its people. He knew their history better than any living Velkhori. He had read accounts of their wars, their struggles, their bizarre and contradictory nature. He had studied their art and their weapons, their poetry and their instruments of destruction.
He had never expected to meet one in person.
The Eternal Witness held position near the diplomatic rendezvous point, a lonely stretch of space far from any system. The debris of the Battle of Kethvara had not yet reached this region. Here, at least, the stars seemed clean.
Vessel approaching, the sensor officer reported. Single ship, configuration unknown. It's small.
Vethsarai moved to the tactical display. The human ship was indeed small, perhaps 1/8 the size of the Eternal Witness, which itself was merely a diplomatic courier. The vessel's design was strange to Velkhori eyes, angular where they expected curves, compact where they expected extension. It looked functional rather than elegant, efficient rather than beautiful.
It looked, Vethsarai realized with a small shock, like something designed by people who expected to be shot at.
"Hail them," Vethsarai ordered.
The communication was established within moments. A human face appeared on the primary view screen, the first human face Vethsarai had ever seen outside of ancient archival footage. It belonged to a female, according to his research, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. Her expression was calm, patient, utterly unreadable.
"This is Captain Okonkwo of the Terran vessel Quiet Persistence," the human said. Her voice was low and steady. "We've received your distress call. We're here to talk."
Vethsarai stepped forward, making sure his translator was properly calibrated. Captain Okonkwo, I am Vethsarai Fandrix, Archivist of the Velkhori Remnant Council. On behalf of my people, I thank you for responding to our call.
The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Gratitude was difficult when it was mixed with so much historical shame. Captain Okonkwo nodded once. Her expression did not change. "You're welcome. Permission to come aboard? I think this conversation works better face to face." Vethsarai hesitated. Every protocol he had been trained in screamed that this was irregular, dangerous, unpredictable. But then again, what did protocols matter when your civilization was dying? "Permission granted," he said. "We will prepare a reception." The screen went dark. Vethsarai turned to find Sevalori watching him with barely concealed anxiety.
Are you certain about this? She asked.
"No," Vethsarai replied honestly, "but we are out of certainties. We have only chances now." Captain Okonkwo arrived alone. This, more than anything, unsettled Vethsarai. The Velkhori diplomatic protocols required a minimum escort of 6 armed guards for any interspecies contact. The idea of sending a single representative, unarmed and unprotected, into a vessel of unknown intentions seemed either profoundly naive or profoundly confident. Looking at Captain Okonkwo as she stepped through the airlock, Veth Sarai did not think she was naive. She was shorter than he had expected. Humans were, on average, smaller than Valkyrie, but there was a solidity to her presence that made her seem larger. She wore a simple uniform, dark gray with minimal insignia. Her hands were empty. Her posture was relaxed but alert, like a predator at rest. "Archivist Thandrix," she said, inclining her head slightly. "Thank you for receiving me."
Captain Okonkwo, please follow me. We have prepared a conference chamber.
They walked through the corridors of the Eternal Witness in silence. Veth Sarai noticed how the human's eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail: the architecture, the lighting, the placement of doorways and intersections. She was mapping the ship, he realized. Unconsciously or deliberately, she was learning its layout, identifying choke points and exits. It was the behavior of someone who had lived through violence, someone who expected it to find them again. "You have a beautiful vessel," Okonkwo said eventually. Her tone was polite, even warm, but there was something guarded beneath it. "It is old," Veth Sarai replied. "Built during an era when we believed our empire would last forever, an era of certainty."
"Nothing lasts forever," Okonkwo said. It was not spoken as a challenge or a judgment, simply a statement of fact, offered without cruelty.
They reached the conference chamber. Veth Sarai had ordered it prepared in the traditional style, a circular room with a central projection table, surrounded by cushioned seats designed for Valkyrie physiology. Someone had thought to add a human-style chair, though it looked somewhat uncomfortable and out of place.
Okonkwo glanced at it and chose to remain standing.
"Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge something." Veth Sarai folded two of his hands together, a gesture of attention among his people. "Please, we know what your species did to ours. The containment, the destroyed ships, the quarantine that kept us trapped in our home system for millennia." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Veth Sarai felt heat rise to his skin, shame manifesting in the silver-blue pigment of his species.
"Captain,
Okonkwo raised a hand, and he fell silent.
"I'm not saying this to extract an apology," she continued. "I'm saying it because you need to understand we know. We remember. And we came anyway."
Veth Sarai found himself without words. He had prepared for hostility, for demands for reparations, for lengthy negotiations over the terms of any assistance. He had not prepared for this quiet acknowledgement, this deliberate setting aside of historical grievance.
"Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you help us after everything we did?"
Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something Veth Sarai had not expected, a kind of gentle weariness, as if she had answered this question many times before. "Because you asked," she said. "Because you're dying. Because the thing killing you doesn't care about the politics between our species. And if we start choosing who deserves to be saved, we become something we don't want to be." She paused. "And because we understand what it's like to face extinction alone." Veth Sarai felt something shift inside him, some wall of ancient prejudice beginning to crack. "We treated your kind as animals," he said quietly, "as threats to be contained. Our records describe your species as violent, unpredictable, dangerous beyond measure." "We are all of those things," Okonkwo agreed. "Sometimes. Just as we are capable of kindness, sacrifice, and building civilizations from rubble. Humans are contradictions. We've spent our entire history trying to reconcile the best and worst parts of ourselves." She met his eyes directly. "But when someone asks for help, truly asks, we don't leave them behind. We can't. It's not who we want to be. The conversation paused. Veth Sarai moved to the central projection table and activated the tactical display. The map of Velkori space appeared, or what remained of it. Red markers indicated harvester presence. Too many red markers.
This is our situation, he said. In the last 40 cycles, we have lost 73% of our territory. Kethvora Prime was destroyed 18 cycles ago. Our remaining military assets are insufficient to mount any meaningful defense. The harvesters do not respond to communication. They do not negotiate. They simply arrive, strip worlds of resources and organic material, and move on.
Okonkwo studied the map in silence. Her expression remained neutral, but Veth Sarai thought he saw something flickering behind her eyes. Calculation, perhaps. Assessment. How many survivors? She asked.
Approximately 50 million scattered across refugee vessels and hidden stations. Perhaps twice that number are still trapped in occupied territory, awaiting extraction that may never come.
And the harvesters themselves? What do you know about their capabilities?
Veth Sarai called up the relevant files. They employ vessels ranging from small interceptor craft to massive processing ships several kilometers in length. Their weapons technology is approximately equivalent to our own, but their numbers are vast. We estimate their primary fleet at over 100,000 vessels.
Origins?
Unknown. They emerged from beyond the galactic rim approximately 1 standard year ago. We believe they may be a von Neumann swarm, self-replicating machines designed to consume and multiply, but we cannot be certain. Okonkwo absorbed this information without visible reaction. She walked slowly around the projection, studying it from different angles. Finally, she stopped and looked at Veth Sarai.
What do you want from us?
The question was simple, direct, and utterly terrifying, because the honest answer was everything. The Velkori needed ships, weapons, soldiers, resources. They needed a miracle.
Whatever you are willing to offer, Veth Sarai said carefully. We understand that your species has its own concerns, its own priorities. We are in no position to make demands. We can only ask for mercy. Okonkwo's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something softened around her eyes.
Mercy, she repeated. That's a word we don't hear often in diplomatic negotiations.
We are beyond diplomacy, Captain. We are in the final days of our existence. Pride is a luxury we can no longer afford.
The human nodded slowly. She reached into her uniform and produced a small communication device. I need to consult with my superiors. This is a decision that affects more than just my ship.
Of course, we will provide you with quarters.
That won't be necessary. Okonkwo was already raising the device to her ear. This won't take long. Veth Sarai watched in confusion as the human spoke rapidly into the device in her own language. The translator implant in his ear picked up fragments, confirming situation, recommend full engagement, authorization requested, but the meaning eluded him. The conversation lasted perhaps 90 seconds. When Okonkwo lowered the device, her expression had changed. The guardedness was still there, but beneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation. Archivist Thandrix, she said formally. On behalf of the Terran Assembly, I am authorized to offer the full support of the United Human Response Fleet in your defense against the Harvester threat.
Veth Sarai blinked. The full support? Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but our intelligence suggests your species has perhaps a few hundred vessels capable of...
Your intelligence is out of date, Okonkwo interrupted gently. Very out of date.
What do you mean?
The human smiled for the first time since her arrival. It was not a triumphant smile, nor a cruel one. It was the smile of someone about to reveal a truth they had been waiting a long time to share. Archivist, when you contained us in our home system, you believed you were protecting the galaxy from a dangerous species. You assumed that isolation would limit our development, keep us primitive, prevent us from becoming a threat. She paused. You were wrong.
Wrong? Humanity is very, very good at adapting to adversity. When you closed the door on us, we didn't give up. We didn't stagnate. We channeled everything we are, all our creativity, all our determination, all our fury into finding another way. Okonkwo's eyes seemed to hold galaxies. 8,000 years is a long time to prepare, a long time to build, a long time to become something you never expected.
Vethsarai felt a chill run through his body. How many ships do you have? Okonkwo's smile faded, replaced by something more serious, more terrifying. The first wave will arrive in 6 hours. It consists of the 3rd, 7th, and 19th Expeditionary Fleets, approximately 4,000 vessels, including 12 Dreadnought-class carriers. They will establish a defensive perimeter around your remaining refugee populations.
Vethsarai's hearts were pounding now. 4,000 vessels, more than the entire Velkori fleet at its height.
The second wave, Okonkwo continued, will arrive within 20 hours. Main battle groups from the Lunar Yards, the Titan Shipworks, and the Outer Ring Coalition. Another 12,000 vessels supported by autonomous combat platforms. 12,000! The third wave is already being mobilized. Combined forces from the Sol Defensive Network, the Alpha Centauri Industrial Combine, and volunteer militias from across the Assembly. Current projections suggest approximately 45,000 combat-capable vessels. Vethsarai sat down heavily. His legs could no longer support him. The numbers were impossible. They were beyond impossible. They suggested a scale of military production that his mind could not process.
61,000 ships, he whispered, in 40 hours.
That's just the initial commitment, Okongo said. If this becomes a protracted engagement, we can scale up significantly.
Scale up? From 61,000 vessels?
Archivist Thandrix. The human's voice was gentle now, almost kind. We spent 8 millennia trapped in a single system, 8,000 years with nowhere to go, nothing to do but build and prepare and remember what had been done to us. We converted asteroids into shipyards. We hollowed out moons for production facilities. We developed automated manufacturing that never stops, never rests, never forgets its purpose.
She stepped closer to the tactical display, and her reflection merged with the stars. When we finally broke free of your containment, we didn't stop building. We just had more room to work with, more resources, more time. We knew, you see, that eventually something would come for us again. Something would try to contain us or destroy us or simply find us too dangerous to let live. And when that day came, we wanted to be ready.
Vethsarai stared at her. You were preparing for war with us.
We were preparing for war with everything, but Okonkwo's expression softened. We hoped it would never come to that. We hoped that when we finally emerged, we could find a different path.
That's why we kept our true capabilities hidden. That's why we presented ourselves as minor, insignificant, not worth worrying about. We wanted a chance to prove we could be more than what your records said we were.
And the Harvesters gave you that chance.
The Harvesters gave us a common enemy, an enemy that doesn't care about old grudges or ancient politics, an enemy that threatens everyone. Okonkwo placed a hand on the tactical display, and the map shifted to show human space. That shadow Veth Sorai had seen before, now expanded and detailed. We could have stayed hidden. We could have let the Harvesters finish with you, and then faced them ourselves when they inevitably turned toward our territory. But that's not who we chose to be.
Veth Sorai was weeping. He had not realized it until he felt the tears running down the silver-blue skin of his face, tracing channels around his eyes.
Why? He asked again, the question smaller now, more fragile. After everything, after all the harm we did to you, why would you sacrifice your people to save ours?
Okonkwo was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice carried an old sorrow, an old wisdom earned through generations of struggle.
Because 400 years ago, before we broke free of your containment, there was a war on Earth, the last great war between humans. Billions died. Entire nations burned. We came within a breath of destroying ourselves completely.
She paused, and Veth Sorai saw something ancient in her eyes, a memory that had been passed down through generations, polished smooth by repetition. In the aftermath, we made a promise. The survivors who crawled out of the ashes, who rebuilt from nothing, who unified our species for the first time in history, they swore that humanity would never again stand by while others suffered extinction. They swore that if we were strong enough to help, we would help, regardless of the cost, regardless of who was asking. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They called it the Remembrance Compact, and we have never broken it.
6 hours later, Veth Sorai stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Witness and watched the future arrive.
They came out of faster-than-light transit in formations so precise they seemed choreographed by mathematicians. Wave after wave of human vessels, each one broadcasting identification codes and taking up positions in a defensive sphere around the Valkyrie refugee fleet.
The ships were not beautiful by Valkyrie standards. They were angular, functional, bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. They looked like machines of war designed by people who had known war intimately, who had studied it and hated it and prepared for it with cold efficiency.
But there was a terrible elegance in their coordination. Every vessel knew its position. Every movement was calculated to maximize defensive coverage. Within minutes, what had been a scattered, vulnerable collection of Valkyrie survivors was transformed into the core of an expanding military fortress.
Commander Sevalori stood beside Veth Sorai, her mouth hanging open in undisguised shock.
4,000 vessels, she breathed, more than the combined fleets of every known species in the Galactic Arm. And they say this is just the beginning.
Veth Sorai nodded slowly. He had not slept since his conversation with Captain Okonkwo. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those numbers, 61,000 ships and more to come. A civilization that had converted their imprisonment into an opportunity to prepare for any conceivable threat.
"We were fools," he said quietly. "We saw a dangerous species and tried to cage it. We never considered what happens when you cage something dangerous for 8,000 years.
What happens?
Veth Sorai turned to look at her. It becomes something beyond dangerous. It becomes something that cannot be stopped. Something that has had time to prepare for every scenario, every threat, every possible future. He gestured at the human fleet taking shape around them. We created this. Through our fear, our arrogance, our certainty that we knew best, we created the very thing we were afraid of.
And now? Now they are choosing to save us instead of destroy us, and I cannot decide if that makes them angels or something even more terrifying.
The harvesters detected the human fleet 12 hours later. Veth-Sorai was in the command center of the Eternal Witness when the sensor officer let out a sharp exclamation.
Harvester task force approaching. Approximately 800 vessels on intercept course. They'll be in weapons range within the hour.
The room filled with tension. 800 harvester vessels would have been enough to annihilate the remaining Valkyrie forces with ease. They had done it before at the Battle of Kethvora, where the combined might of the 4th and 6th fleets had barely scratched the enemy before being overwhelmed. But this time was different.
A holographic display flickered to life, showing the tactical situation. The harvester force was approaching from the galactic north, their vessels arranged in the swarm formation that had proven so devastating in previous engagements. They moved with the terrifying coordination of a hive mind, every ship an extension of some vast, hungry intelligence.
And between them and the refugee fleet stood 4,000 human vessels. A communication request came through from the quiet persistence. Captain Okonkwo's face appeared on the main screen, calm and professional.
Archivist Thandrix, I recommend you move the Eternal Witness to the center of the defensive formation. Things are about to become somewhat energetic in the outer perimeter.
Captain, Veth-Sorai began.
Don't worry, Okonkwo interrupted. We've dealt with swarm-type enemies before. They're not as unstoppable as they appear. They have patterns, weaknesses. We've been studying their tactics since they first appeared in our long-range sensors months ago. She smiled that unsettling, confident smile. We know how to handle them.
The display shifted to show the human fleet reforming. Vessels moved with that same precise choreography, creating layers of defensive fire while dedicated strike groups maneuvered into flanking positions.
All human vessels, Okonkwo announced on an open channel, commence Operation Adamantine. Primary objective, 0 enemy penetration of the defensive perimeter. Secondary objective, attritional elimination of hostile forces. Tertiary objective, capture of intact enemy vessels for analysis. Veth-Sorai blinked. Capture? You want to capture harvester vessels?
We want to understand them, Okonkwo replied. Where they come from, why they do what they do, whether they can be communicated with, reasoned with, perhaps even turned from their purpose. We won't know unless we study them. She paused. Humanity learned long ago that destroying your enemies is sometimes necessary, but understanding them is always valuable.
The harvester fleet closed to weapons range, and then everything happened at once.
The human vessels opened fire in a coordinated barrage that turned the void into a tapestry of light. Weapon systems that Veth-Sorai didn't recognize, plasma lances, kinetic accelerators, something that looked like contained antimatter, struck the leading edge of the harvester swarm with devastating precision.
But the harvesters didn't stop. They never stopped. They absorbed the losses and kept coming, their own weapons returning fire, their damaged vessels breaking apart only to be replaced by the ones behind them.
What followed was the most intense naval engagement Veth-Sorai had ever witnessed. The human vessels moved through the battle like dancers, each one knowing exactly where it needed to be at every moment. Damaged ships pulled back while others covered their retreat. Strike groups swept through gaps in the Harvester formation, delivering punishing attacks and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. Defensive formations shifted and reformed, adapting to every Harvester tactic with frightening speed.
And through it all, the human fleet didn't break, didn't panic, didn't retreat.
Casualties? Vetsurai asked, his voice tight.
The sensor officer checked the display. Human vessels lost, 27. Harvester vessels destroyed, 418. Harvester vessels disabled and captured, 12.
27 losses against 418 destroyed. The numbers were impossible. The Valkyrie had never achieved better than a 3-to-1 exchange ratio against the Harvesters, and usually suffered far worse.
How? Commander Sevalori demanded. How are they doing this?
Vetsurai watched the battle unfold, and slowly a terrible understanding began to form.
They've been fighting for 8,000 years, he said quietly. Not against us, against each other. They perfected the art of war long before they ever left their homeworld. Every tactic the Harvesters are using, humans invented centuries ago. Every countermeasure, every adaptation, every strategy for overwhelming defensive positions, they've seen it all before.
He pointed to a group of human vessels executing a flanking maneuver that cut through the Harvester formation like a knife.
See how they move? They're not reacting to the Harvesters. They're anticipating them. They know exactly what the swarm will do because they've run thousands of simulations, studied every piece of intelligence, planned for exactly this scenario. His voice dropped to a whisper. They've been preparing for this their entire existence. We just didn't realize it was us they'd end up saving.
The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Harvester task force had been reduced to debris and captured hulks. Human losses stood at 44 vessels destroyed, another 112 damaged. The defensive perimeter remained unbroken.
Captain Okonkwo's face reappeared on the main display. She looked tired, but satisfied.
Phase 1 complete. The initial threat has been neutralized. She paused, consulting something off-screen. Second wave will arrive in 6 hours. Once they're in position, we'll begin Phase 2, securing a corridor for refugee evacuation while pushing forward to engage the main Harvester fleet.
The main fleet? Vetsurai repeated. 100,000 vessels. Approximately, yes, though our analysts believe the number may be closer to 120,000 based on recent observation. Okonkwo's expression didn't change. It's going to be a longer fight, but we're ready. Vetsurai shook his head slowly. Captain, I cannot ask you to sacrifice your people for ours. The numbers.
Archivist. Okonkwo's voice was gentle but firm. With respect, you're not asking, we're choosing. There's a difference.
The second wave arrived on schedule.
12,000 additional human vessels dropped out of FTL transit, their formations even more impressive than the first wave. These were not just warships, they were accompanied by massive industrial vessels, hospital ships, refugee transports. A civilization mobilizing for total war, but also for total support.
Vetsurai was exhausted. He had not slept in over 40 hours, surviving on stimulants and a determination to witness everything. This was history, the most significant event in galactic history since the rise of the Valkyrie themselves, and he would be damned if he missed a moment of it.
He was in the command center when the long-range sensors detected something that changed everything.
Harvester main fleet detected, the sensor officer announced, her voice trembling. Full strength, approaching from the Galactic core. Estimated arrival, 72 hours.
The tactical display updated. What had been a red marker representing estimated enemy presence became a vast scarlet wave sweeping toward their position. 120,000 vessels, moving with the implacable inevitability of a natural disaster.
The room fell silent.
Then, unexpectedly, Vethsorai laughed.
Commander Sevalori turned to him with concern in her eyes. Archivist? 72 hours, Vethsorai said. In 72 hours, the third human wave will have arrived. 45,000 vessels, they said, and if needed, they can scale up significantly. He gestured at the display. For the first time since this nightmare began, we might actually survive. As if to confirm his words, a new communication came through from the human fleet. This time, it wasn't Captain Okonkwo. It was someone different, an older man with gray hair and deep lines on his dark face, wearing the more elaborate uniform of a higher-ranking officer.
Valkyrie Remnant Council, the man said. This is Fleet Admiral Thomas Chen of the Terran Assembly Defense Force. I'm transmitting from the carrier Endless Resolve, which is currently en route with the third wave. I wanted to speak with you directly about what comes next.
Vethsorai stepped forward. Admiral Chen, I am Archivist Vethsorai Thandrix, speaking on behalf of the Remnant Council. We are profoundly grateful for your assistance.
Chen nodded slowly. I've reviewed the tactical situation. You're facing an extinction-level threat, and you've lost most of your industrial capacity. Even if we defeat the Harvester fleet, rebuilding will take generations.
We are aware, Vethsorai said quickly. We have accepted that the Valkyrie civilization as we knew it is gone. We hope only to survive in some form.
That's not good enough. Chen's voice hardened. Not for us. We didn't come here to help you survive. We came to help you rebuild. When this is over, the Terran Assembly will open full diplomatic and economic relations with the Valkyrie remnant. We will provide technology transfers, industrial assistance, refugee resettlement support. We will help you become strong again.
Vethsorai felt tears threatening once more.
Admiral, we cannot possibly repay such generosity.
It's not generosity, it's strategy. Chen's expression softened slightly. A healthy, stable Valkyrie civilization is good for everyone. Good for the galaxy, good for humanity. We've spent too long thinking about interspecies relations as zero-sum games. One side wins, one side loses. That's not how the universe actually works. When you lift up your neighbors, the whole neighborhood improves.
This philosophy, Vethsorai said slowly, it is not what we expected from humans.
Chen smiled, a tired, knowing smile. I know what your records say about us. Violent, dangerous, unpredictable. And all of those things are true, sometimes. But they're not the only truth. Humanity is capable of terrible things. We've proven that over and over throughout our history. But we're also capable of building, healing, creating, loving. Every generation we try to be a little better than the one before. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we succeed, but we never stop trying.
He paused, and his expression became serious again. In 72 hours, we're going to engage the largest hostile fleet anyone in this galaxy has ever faced. Thousands of human beings are going to die. They know this. They're coming anyway. His voice caught slightly. That's who we are, Archivist. Not the monsters your ancestors feared, not the primitives you tried to contain, just people. People who refuse to stand by while others suffer.
The communication ended. Veth Sorai stood in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. Then he turned to Commander Sevalori. "I want a message transmitted to all Valkyrie survivors," he said. "Tell them what the humans have done. Tell them what the humans have promised. Tell them that we are not alone anymore."
"What about the council?" Sevalori asked. "They will want to debate, to discuss."
"The council can debate after the battle," Veth Sorai interrupted. "Right now, our people need hope. Give it to them."
The next 70 hours passed in a blur of preparation and tension. The third human wave arrived ahead of schedule. 53,000 vessels rather than the projected 45,000. Volunteer militias from across human space had exceeded all expectations. Ships that had been held in reserve, vessels that commanders had been reluctant to commit, crews that had come out of retirement, they all converged on the coordinates drawn by something that defied easy explanation.
Veth Sorai spent much of that time aboard the Quiet Persistence, Captain Okonkwo's vessel. He had requested permission to observe human preparations, and to his surprise, the permission had been granted without hesitation. The ship was small and cramped by Valkyrie standards, but there was an efficiency to its design that Veth Sorai had come to appreciate. Every space served a purpose. Every system was built for reliability under stress. The crew moved through their duties with the calm professionalism of people who had trained for exactly this scenario.
"You seem surprised," Okonkwo said, finding him in the observation lounge during a brief lull in activity.
"I am trying to reconcile what I am seeing with what I was taught," Veth Sorai admitted. "My entire education told me that humans were chaos incarnate, brilliant but uncontrollable, dangerous because you could not be predicted."
Okonkwo settled into a seat across from him. "We were chaos once. Before the last war, before the unification. We were a species constantly at war with itself, unable to agree on anything, tearing ourselves apart over differences that seemed trivial in retrospect." She stared out at the stars. "The last war changed everything. When you've seen nuclear fire consume cities, when you've watched billions die because leaders couldn't find common ground, you either learn or you go extinct."
"You learned." "We learned that our differences were less important than our survival. We learned that cooperation was stronger than conflict. We learned that discipline didn't mean losing our passion. It meant channeling it towards something greater than individual pride." She turned to look at him directly. "The chaos is still there, Archivist. We still argue, debate, disagree. But we've learned to set those disagreements aside when it matters. When the stakes are high enough, humanity moves as one." "And the stakes now?" Okonkwo's expression became grave. "An extinction-level threat to a neighboring civilization. The possibility of that threat reaching our own borders if not stopped. The chance to prove that we're not the monsters everyone assumed we were." She paused. "Every human in this fleet knows what's at stake. They're not here because they were ordered. They're here because they chose to be." Veth Sorai processed this. "Choice," he said slowly. "Your civilization is built on choice. More than anything else. The freedom to choose your own path, to make your own decisions, to determine who you want to be. It's messy, it's inefficient sometimes, but it's the core of what makes us human." She smiled slightly. "Including the choice to help those who once tried to cage us." "I do not understand that choice," Veth Sorai admitted. "If our positions were reversed, if the Valkyrie had been imprisoned by humans for 8,000 years, and then humans asked us for help, I do not believe we would answer." "Maybe not. And maybe that's why things happened the way they did. Your civilization was built on age and wisdom, and the certainty that you knew best. Ours was built on struggle and loss, and the determination to never stop fighting. Okonkwo shrugged. Neither approach is perfect, but sometimes being forged in fire gives you something that comfortable wisdom can't provide.
And what is that?
Empathy. Real empathy. The kind that comes from knowing what it's like to suffer, to lose, to face extinction and somehow survive anyway. We remember what it was like to be helpless, Archivist. We remember what it was like to have no one come to help, and we swore we would never let anyone else feel that way if we could prevent it.
Veth Sarai was silent for a long time.
You are not what I expected, he said finally.
Neither are you, Okonkwo replied. I expected arrogance, condescension, demands for specific guarantees before any assistance would be rendered. Instead, I found an old man asking for mercy and weeping when it was granted.
I am tired of arrogance, Veth Sarai said. I am tired of certainty. I have watched everything I believed in burn, and I have discovered that most of my beliefs were wrong. Perhaps it is time for new beliefs.
Okonkwo reached across the space between them and placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort that transcended species barriers.
That's how civilizations grow, she said, not by clinging to what they were, but by becoming what they need to be. The Velkhori aren't finished, Archivist. You're just beginning a new chapter. The Battle of the Remnant, as it would later be called, began at dawn of the 73rd hour. The Harvester fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 122,000 vessels, stretching across a volume of space that defied comprehension. They moved toward the human defensive perimeter with the same implacable determination they had shown in every previous engagement.
The human fleet awaited them. 68,000 vessels now, reinforced by the last arrivals from distant sectors. They formed concentric defensive spheres around the Velkhori refugee fleet, layers upon layers of firepower and coordination. Every ship knew its position. Every crew understood their role.
Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet-wide communication channel.
All hands, this is Fleet Admiral Chen. In a few minutes, we will engage the largest hostile force humanity has ever faced. Some of us will not survive this battle, but those who fall will not fall in vain. We are here to protect innocent lives. We are here to prove that humanity is more than what the galaxy feared. We are here because this is who we are.
He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an ancient weight. Remember the Remembrance Compact. Remember what our ancestors swore on the ashes of the last war. Never again will we stand by while others face extinction alone. Never again will we let fear or anger or old grievances prevent us from doing what is right. Another pause.
All vessels, engage. The space between the fleets erupted into chaos.
Veth Sarai watched from the command center of the Eternal Witness, which had been moved to the very center of the defensive formation. The tactical display showed the battle unfolding in real time, a symphony of destruction that painted the void in fire. The harvesters came in waves, just as they always had. Thousands of vessels swept forward, weapons blazing, attempting to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer numbers. They had succeeded before. They had always succeeded before.
This time was different.
The human fleet didn't try to hold a single line. Instead, they created layered defenses that bent and flexed without breaking. As one section came under heavy pressure, reinforcements flowed to support it. As harvester formations pressed too deep, they found themselves surrounded and eliminated. The battle was not a static confrontation. It was a constantly evolving dance of maneuver and countermaneuver. And through it all, the humans fought with an intensity that defied description. Damaged vessels didn't retreat. They repositioned to continue fighting from protected positions. Crews that should have evacuated stayed at their posts, buying time for others to regroup. Ships that had exhausted their primary weapons switched to ramming attacks rather than withdraw.
They're dying, Commander Sevalori said, her voice hollow. Thousands of them are dying, and they won't stop fighting.
They knew this would happen, Veth'Sorai replied. They knew, and they came anyway, because they chose to.
The battle raged for 6 hours.
By the 4th hour, human losses had climbed past 8,000 vessels. The harvester fleet had been reduced by more than half, but still they came, relentless and hungry. The defensive perimeter was holding, but barely. Cracks were appearing, weak points where the harvester assault was threatening to break through.
And then something extraordinary happened.
A massive formation of human vessels, at least 10,000 ships that had been held in reserve, suddenly surged forward. They weren't reinforcing the defensive line, they were bypassing it entirely, arcing around the ongoing battle in a wide flanking maneuver.
What are they doing? Sevalori demanded. That formation is heading directly toward the Harvester Corps ships, the command vessels.
Veth'Sorai watched in amazement as the human attack force carved through the harvester flanks. They weren't trying to destroy every enemy vessel. They were cutting a path, a surgical corridor aimed directly at the heart of the harvester fleet.
They identified the command structure, he breathed. The harvesters operate as a collective, but there must be primary control nodes coordinating the swarm. The humans found them.
The attack was devastatingly effective. As human vessels reached the harvester command ships and began destroying them, the swarm's coordination began to break down. Vessels that had been moving in perfect formation started to fragment. Attacks that had been precisely synchronized became ragged and inefficient.
The tide of the battle turned.
Over the next 2 hours, the harvester fleet came apart. Without their command nodes, the individual ships became disorganized, attacking randomly instead of strategically. The human fleet adapted instantly, shifting from defense to offense, pursuing and eliminating the scattered remnants.
When it was finally over, the harvester fleet had been reduced to wreckage.
Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channel once more, but this time it was raw with exhaustion and grief. All vessels, cease fire. Enemy forces have been eliminated or disabled. Begin rescue and recovery operations for all survivors, regardless of species. The display showed the aftermath, a vast field of debris and drifting hulks illuminated by the distant light of stars. Human and Valkyrie vessels moved through the wreckage, searching for escape pods, for survivors, for anyone who could be saved.
Our losses? Sevalori asked quietly.
Veth'Sorai checked the display. His heart felt heavy. Human vessels destroyed, 14,782. Human casualties, approximately 2.3 million individuals. He paused, struggling to continue. Valkyrie vessels lost, 0. Valkyrie casualties, 0. Sevalori stared at him. They lost 14,000 ships protecting us?
They lost 2 million people protecting us.
Vesorai closed his eyes. People who volunteered to die for a species that once imprisoned their ancestors. People who knew they wouldn't survive and came anyway. The weight of that sacrifice pressed down upon him like the gravity of a dying star. In the days that followed, Vesorai learned the full scope of what humanity had done. The fleet that had fought at the Battle of the Remnant was not the entirety of human military power. It wasn't even close. Across the 800 systems they now controlled, humans maintained reserves that dwarfed what had been deployed. They had weapon systems that had never been used, technologies that had never been revealed, capabilities that remained classified even to their allies. They had, in short, been preparing for the end of everything. And when the end had come for someone else instead, they had chosen to share their preparation. The Terran assembly began immediate humanitarian operations. Hospital ships treated Velkori wounded. Industrial vessels began the work of clearing debris and establishing temporary habitation platforms. Refugee transports began the long process of relocating survivors to safe territories.
And through it all, the humans asked for nothing in return.
Vesorai met with Admiral Chen in person a week after the battle. The admiral looked older than he had appeared in the communication, the lines on his face deeper, the weight of 2 million deaths visible in his eyes.
"You're wondering why," Chen said. It wasn't a question.
"I have been wondering since Captain Okonkwo first arrived," Vesorai admitted. "I have theories, I have explanations, but I cannot truly understand." Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring out the viewport of his office aboard the Endless Resolve. "There's a story," he said finally, "a very old story from Earth, from before we even had writing to record it. A story about a man who found another man beaten and left for dead on the road. Everyone else walked past, people from the victim's own tribe, his own community. But this stranger, from a tribe that was considered enemies, stopped. He helped. He bound the man's wounds and took him to safety and paid for his care." Chen turned to look at Vesorai directly. "The story is thousands of years old, Archivist. It's been told in 100 languages, adapted to 1,000 different contexts, and the lesson is always the same. Your neighbor is not defined by tribe or species or history. Your neighbor is whoever needs your help when you have the power to give it." "And you believe this? All of your people?" "Not all. Humans are too diverse for universal belief. But enough of us believe it that it shaped our civilization. Enough of us believe it that when the call came, 2 million people volunteered to die for strangers." Chen's voice cracked slightly. "I lost friends in that battle. Family. People I had known for decades. And not one of them regretted being there." Vesorai felt the tears beginning again. He did not try to stop them. "We called you primitives," he said. "We called you dangerous. We locked you away because we were afraid of what you might become." "And you were right to be afraid," Chen said. "We are dangerous. We are capable of terrible things, violence, destruction, cruelty that defies comprehension. But that's not all we are. The same fire that makes us dangerous also makes us capable of incredible courage, sacrifice, love. You can't have one without the other." "We never understood that." "You never had the chance to. That's the thing about your quarantine, Archivist. You locked us away before we could show you who we really are. You judged us on potential alone, on what we might become. And so you never saw what we actually became." Vesorai wiped his eyes. "And what is that?" Admiral Chen smiled. A tired, sad, beautiful smile. "We became what we chose to be. Not monsters, not angels, just
people, trying our best to be worthy of the universe we were given. Some days we fail, some days we succeed, but we never stop trying.
6 months after the Battle of the Remnant, Veth Sarai stood before the newly constituted Valkyrie Council. The chamber was smaller than the great halls of Kethvora Prime, a converted cargo bay aboard a human-built station, but it held representatives from every surviving Valkyrie community.
He had been asked to give a report on the state of relations with humanity. He had spent weeks preparing, reviewing every interaction, every treaty, every exchange of information, and in the end, he had thrown away his prepared remarks.
"Counselors," he began, his voice echoing in the silence, "I was asked to report on our relationship with the Terran Assembly. I was asked to provide strategic assessments, diplomatic projections, analyses of potential threats and opportunities." He paused, gathering himself. "I cannot do that. I cannot reduce what has happened to us, what is still happening, to mere strategy and diplomacy. What I can do is tell you the truth." The council waited. 400,000 years ago, our ancestors looked up at the stars and dreamed of empire. They built, they conquered, they spread across 1,000 worlds. They believed they had achieved the pinnacle of civilization, the ultimate expression of what intelligent life could accomplish. And in their certainty, they made judgments about younger species. They decided who was worthy of joining their community and who was too dangerous to exist. He took a deep breath. They were wrong. We were wrong. For 8,000 years, we kept a species imprisoned in their home system because we feared what they might become. We destroyed their early ships. We denied them the stars. We condemned them to isolation because we believed we knew better. His voice hardened.
And when we faced extinction, when everything we had built was burning, they came anyway. They came knowing what we had done to them. They came knowing they would suffer. They came knowing they would die. And they never asked for an apology. They never demanded justice. They simply helped.
Veth Sarai felt tears threatening again, but he continued. 2 million humans gave their lives to save us. 2 million individuals who volunteered to die for strangers, for the descendants of their jailers. There is no strategy that explains this. There is no diplomatic calculus that justifies it. There is only one word that comes close, and it is a word I thought I understood before, but clearly never did. He straightened, meeting the eyes of every council member. The word is compassion, true compassion, the kind that does not require worthiness, the kind that does not demand repayment, the kind that sees suffering and responds, regardless of history or politics or fear. He was crying now, openly, without shame. We are alive because humans chose compassion over vengeance. We have a future because they chose hope over hatred. And if we learn nothing else from this experience, if all our ancient wisdom and accumulated knowledge is worth anything at all, we must learn this. Our certainties nearly destroyed us. Our humility saved us. Veth Sarai lowered his head. I recommend, counselors, that we never forget what happened here. I recommend that we teach our children and their children and every generation to come the story of how a single Terran vessel entered orbit and panic spread across the galaxy, not because they had come to conquer, but because everything we believed was about to change. He looked up one final time.
And I recommend that we thank whatever powers exist in this universe that humanity chose to be better than us. Because if they had chosen otherwise, we would deserve whatever they did.
In the years that followed, Veth-Sarai Thondrix became the first Velkhori ambassador to the Terran Assembly. He lived another century and a half, witnessing the rebirth of his civilization and the forging of an alliance that would reshape galactic politics forever. He never forgot Captain Okonkwo, who continued to serve until her retirement, or Admiral Chen, who died peacefully surrounded by family. He never forgot the 14,000 ships that had burned to protect strangers, or the 2 million souls who had given everything for people who had never given them anything.
And whenever someone asked him about humanity, whenever some young Velkhori scholar questioned the strange relationship between their species, he would tell them a simple truth.
We caged them because we were afraid, he would say. We were afraid because we saw a species capable of terrible things: war, destruction, self-annihilation. We saw chaos and violence, and we thought we knew what that meant.
He would pause, and his ancient eyes would grow distant with memory.
We never understood that the same fire which made them capable of destruction also made them capable of salvation. We never understood that a species forged in struggle would know, better than any peaceful civilization, the value of mercy. We never understood that they had faced extinction themselves, had stared into the abyss and survived, and that this experience had taught them something we could never learn.
His voice would drop to barely above a whisper. They learned that the universe is vast and cold and indifferent. They learned that survival is never guaranteed. And they learned that in the face of such cosmic indifference, the only truly meaningful act is to help those who cannot help themselves. He would smile then, the expression carrying 600 years of wisdom and wonder. We feared them because they could destroy anything. We should have admired them because they chose to save everything.
The last entry in Veth-Sarai's personal archive, recorded the night before his death at the age of 742, contained only a single paragraph.
A single Terran vessel entered orbit, and panic spread across the galaxy. But the panic was not in the ancient halls of power, not in the command centers of dying fleets, not in the refugee ships crowded with the survivors of a shattered civilization. The panic was in the hearts of those who had believed they knew everything, who had believed that age guaranteed wisdom, that power guaranteed righteousness, that the universe could be understood and controlled.
A single Terran vessel entered orbit, and in its quiet approach, in its restrained power, in its simple offer of help, everything changed. Not because humanity conquered us, not because they proved us wrong, but because they proved that after 8,000 years of imprisonment, after every reason to hate and destroy and take revenge, they still chose kindness. They still chose mercy. They still chose to be the species they wanted to be, rather than the species the universe expected them to be. And in that choice, in that simple, profound, terrifying choice, they showed us what we had never understood about ourselves. We had spent 400 millennia trying to control the future. They taught us, in a single moment, that the only thing worth controlling is who we choose to become. The stars do not remember us.
But perhaps sometimes they should.